Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we have something a little bit different, and these are Arendal Tower speakers, 1723 THX, I believe, if I remember the name correctly. And these are a very interesting speakers. So stay with me today and find out why. So if you follow my channel regularly, you probably know that I mostly use bookshelf speakers. Actually stand mounters, and there's a reason for that. Previously, like maybe 10 years ago, I used to have floor standing speakers, but then I realized that for my budget and what I'm able to pay for the speakers, stand mounters are almost always going to outperform floor standers of that same price in many aspects that are really personally important to me, like how precise and quick and articulate they sound, and also how well they sound stage and pinpoint. So if you go with affordable big speakers, you're usually sacrificing quality of build, and cabinets tend to be a little bit hollow and thin and resonatey, and you do get big sound, but you lose quite a bit of that precision imaging, 3D soundstage and pinpointing. So basically any floor standard that I've personally heard and really liked was way out of my budget. And please don't get me wrong, Arendal that we are going to talk about here today are not cheap speakers by any means. They cost 3500s, and if I understood that correctly, that's with shipping worldwide included. But depending on the country of your whereabouts, there are additional taxes and customs fees, etc, etc. In my country, in Serbia, for example, these would probably cost around 4.5 to 5,000 euros to import. And thankfully, and luckily for me, I did not purchase these myself. A viewer loaned them to me. He actually shipped them directly from customs to my place here to test for you. And I have yet to meet that viewer. We haven't even met in person. What a great guy, right? Thanks for that. But let's talk about these Arendals. I'm not going to bother you too much with tech spec because you can just open their official website and find dimensions and everything you need to know. Just few basics. They're a 2.5-way design, meaning that the lower two drivers are bass only. Then the two around the tweeter are mid-bass and mid-range units, and then we have a tweeter, of course. And the tweeter is a silk dome put in this deep and quite big waveguide. And this design achieves 92 dB of sensitivity, which is quite high. And unlike some other manufacturers that like to bend the truth a little bit when they talk about sensitivity, these really feel like 92 dB sensitive speakers. The moment I first hooked them into my system, I noticed how much less volume on my preamp I need to apply. And there's another even more important thing about sensitivity. Big and sensitive speakers like these tend to sound very dynamic and alive even at lower listening volumes. And that's true for Arendals here. One more interesting thing to notice is that behind we have 3 bass reflex openings. And Arendal provided us with these foam bungs for all of the 3 openings for each speaker, so you can tune it to your taste. If you keep all of these in place, these will act as a sealed box design. I've tried it. It sounded quite okay, tight and fast, but I felt like we need a little bit more meat on the bones. So I unplugged one of the bass reflex ports. Wow, much better. Then I tried unplugging the second one and the third one, and to my taste and in my room, I preferred listening to these with just one port unplugged. And doing that, dividing your bass reflex outlet into several ports so you can tune that gradually is really a great idea with speakers that are this big. I was a little bit afraid that these are going to overwhelm my room, my listening room, but that simply didn't happen. Instead, I found out that these are not even all that demanding when you are trying to position them. The last thing that I wanted to say is that these are high quality made speakers. They're made of HDF and they are heavy. So if you decide to purchase these, better have a friend that is willing to help you with lifting heavy objects, because there is no way you can mount these all by yourself. Okay, maybe it is, but it wouldn't be a pleasant job. So once I've set them up and they're ready to go, how do these Arendal actually sound? Well, part of that I've basically already mentioned when I was talking about their construction. They sound quite big and effortless, and very lively and dynamic even at lower listening volumes. And that's something that only big sensitive speakers can provide. No matter how good Bookshelf is, you'll never get that from a Bookshelf, at least not at that level. And every time a reviewer says something similar about a Bookshelf, it's implied for a Bookshelf speaker. Because even the most dynamic, lively and just effortlessly sounding Bookshelf cannot measure to big towers that are excelling in that category among big speakers. So Arendals here are definitely great with that, with just sounding big and effortless. Tonality is quite well judged, and the bass line is deep, but it's surprisingly tight and well controlled for a floor stander. Part of me not seriously considering floor standers was always that they're so difficult to work with and to balance that bass response and that pressure that they create in your room. But I felt that these Arendals are one of the best behaved floor stander that I've ever heard of this size. They can move lots of air, they can create very good big sound pressure in your room, but somehow that bass line is neat, tidy and controlled. For me and my ears, it strikes that perfect balance between depth, warmth and fullness, and just being well behaved and speedy, quick sounding when it needs to be. Then moving up the frequency spectrum, we have quite open mid-range and highs. I would even say that they're slightly on the brighter side of things. I know that if you look at the measurements of these speakers, they look like perfectly flat and neutral, but to my ears, especially the mid-range, has a slight crispiness and brightness to it. These are not the speakers, like many others, that have that mid-range deliberately tuned to be slightly laid back and slightly fuller and juicier to give vocals like a great pulpability and presence. Instead, mid-range here sounds very open, textures are so easily observed in every tone, including vocals. But there's always that sense that mid-range is on a slightly more revealing, crisper side of things and slightly brighter. Fortunately, that does not come with any sort of aggressiveness. These actually sound quite smooth. I'm talking about tonality that's slightly brighter and crisper. Of course, you can manage that just by pairing them correctly with appropriate gear, using appropriate cables. I don't care if you don't believe in that cables introduce difference in the sound and tonality. And you can write in the comments whatever you need to, so you can deal with your anger issues. Okay, let's leave that topic quickly before some of you get really angry. Highs are well extended. They're airy, they are open and bright and breezy. There is plenty of air around instruments and everything that's happening in the soundstage. But they're never sharp or attacky or aggressive in any way. So that's a thing with this speaker. It does sound very open, breezy and crispy, but not in an aggressive way. So if you combine it correctly and you don't let other parts of your system to actually elevate that brightness, that's not a problem. That will not be a problem. But now let's move to the sound staging. These create really wide soundstage and tall too. And everything, as I said, feels airy and breezy. There's plenty of empty room around the instruments. And because these are so crispy sounding and detailed sounding, you can easily hear the quickest of transients. And then aftertones, that tone decay in space, and these sound very incisive and wide and airy. But there's one thing that they don't do all that well, and that's soundstage depth and the three-dimensionality and pinpointing in 3D space. This to some extent is true for most floor standing speakers. It's just physics, it's their front baffle is big, and so it's true for this Arendal too. And it's not something to be held against them. It's just that I'm a mostly stand mounters kind of guy, and I'm quite used to small speakers with small front baffles that have great 3D and imaging. But don't get me wrong, these are not all that bad regarding sound staging. If you give them a little bit space, if you move them into the room, like I did, 1 meter or maybe even more, these can create like decent soundstage. And if the rest of your system is capable of doing that, maybe you are using R2R or tube sources or tube preamps or maybe even amps. Because remember, these do have 92 dB sensitivity. You can power them with tube amps of a reasonable power if you wanted to. And there are many ways for you to actually inflate that soundstage. And in my system, in my room, it's quite decent, because if you're watching my channel, you know that I'm a big fan of R2R decks. And I'm currently using a tube deck that I made myself. And I also have a Class A preamp that's quite spacious and analog sounding. And it doesn't even matter that my main power amp is Class D Ice Power module. These still sound full, lush and quite big when it comes to sound staging. If you move them closer to walls, the soundstage will become more flat and it will feel more like a wall of sound. They create huge soundstage that's more like a cinema screen, but doesn't have much depth. When I moved to my own stand mounters, Spirit Winds, the soundstage becomes smaller. It's a smaller speaker and the whole sound is a little bit smaller too. But there's a bigger sense of three-dimensionality of tones. It feels like that third dimension, front to back, is more pronounced. But once again, you can improve that quite a bit by positioning them further into your room and using spaciously sounding gear with them. One last thing that I wanted to emphasize, because I've just realized I did not emphasize it enough. And by the way, this will start the part of comparisons. And comparisons will not be all that much because I don't review floor standing speakers all that much, but here we go. So yeah, that last part that I wanted to mention is how actually revealing and crisp these speakers sound. And I didn't expect that. When I saw their size, and they're quite big and chunky in real life, I've expected some like full but kind of boomy sound that's not all that well controlled, and that's big but cannot match to stand mounters when it comes to just sheer precision and resolution. Oh, I was so wrong about that. These have really great resolution. That mid-range crispiness that I've mentioned earlier, it reveals so much of tone texture. So if you listen to female or male vocals, the smallest of vocal cord vibrations and just raspy or sandy vocals, they sound so detailed, and you can hear all that. Every crunchy sound, cymbals hitting, they're not just, like a shrill, high-pitched but simplistic tone. There is so much vibrations and resonance that you can hear from these speakers. And as I've mentioned, bassline is so well controlled and also well textured. And these are simply very revealing speakers. For example, you all probably know about KEF LS50s by now, and I still have the originals, not meta version, but original LS50s with me just as a point of reference. These are actually more incisive and more crispy sounding than LS50. Yes, they are 3 times the price, but that's not the point. They're 5 times bigger, and they have much bigger scale and dynamics that LS50s cannot even begin to approach. But with all of that, they still manage to have higher resolution and higher detail retrieval and tone texture retrieval than LS50, which places them really high no matter what type of speakers we are talking about. And that's actually what makes them exceptional. It's so easy for a really small mini monitor speaker like Blumenhofer Mini that I reviewed to have this kind of open, mid-range, detailed forward tonality, but it's not easy for a big speaker. I didn't review those at my place, but plenty of times I've listened to KEFs from R series, like R7, that are equally priced and similar in size with these speakers. They're much muddier speakers. Their bass line is not as tight and as controlled. Their mid-range is clean but more analytical, not this rich and textured. Highs are not this airy, and the overall sound stage is not this airy and breathy. Focal Aria 9360, something like that. Really nice speakers, by the way. But still, I feel that these are more open. They have more fine details that they can present to you. They play more effortlessly, like they're more dynamic, and just have easier time with rhythm change when rhythm changes on a big scale. So that basically leads me to the conclusion that these are a mighty good speakers, even for their price. That's not a low price, but even at their price, these are a mighty good sounding speakers that, in terms of just how high resolution they are, how well they retrieve details and inner details of each tone, inner textures, they can match like great sounding stand mounters. They do sound staging and soundstage depth as any other big speakers. That means less capable than small stand mounters, but still quite good, especially if you help them a little bit with positioning and matching. I cannot think of any commercial product of any big brand, and this is quickly becoming like a pattern on this channel. Every time I test a product from a smaller manufacturer, It shows that big commercial brands just cannot offer the same sound quality at that same price point. And the value of these Arendals, in my mind and to my ears, is significantly, noticeably better, higher, than if you would just go and buy a well-known commercial brand such as Dyn Audio, KEF, etc. I just have these few tips. Don't pair them with thin sounding solid state gear and like modern sounding thin flat delta sigma DACs as sources. For example, topping DACs. You might not like that sound. It might be just too flat and factual. In my opinion, these are best when something in your chain can bring a little bit of that juice and that magic and that sweet natural tone timbre. R2R DACs, for example, they're famous for sounding tonally full, and they also have great soundstage depth, which also helps with the sound staging of these speakers. Then like tube preamps or just lusher, warmer sounding preamps like acoustic invaders that I'm personally using. Something like that will make the best of these speakers. And these are speakers that are worth building your system around. They're that good and it's just that simple. Now, once again, huge thanks to the viewer that's located here in Serbia that lent me these for a review. I have no contacts with Arendal whatsoever. This is a brand that I'm going to pay closer attention to from now on, because it seems that all the praises about Arendals are well deserved. And that would be all for today. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.